So I was delighted to see the number of hands come up about Fishpeople. Who are we? What do we do? Why do we exist? You know, the mission of the company is to build a vertically integrated, iconic seafood brand. There just isn't one in the United States. You know, can you name another seafood brand? Do you know another seafood brand? Bumblebee, Star-Kissed. Been around a long time, right? So how do we build a brand that can help address some of the systemic challenges in the seafood industry at our coast, in the state, elsewhere in the Pacific Northwest? The vision and the mission are related, but very different, right? So our mission is to build this vertically integrated, iconic brand in the United States that stands for something. What does it stand for? It really wants to reverse the decline in the poverty in the fishing communities and the fish stocks in the world. That's why we're building a brand. Because if we don't, we think that the oceans and the rivers are in trouble, and we think that the communities that rely on those oceans and those rivers are equally in trouble. There are counties in the state of Oregon and Washington that over 20% of the household income comes from commercial fishing. So if you don't have a thoughtful process on how to make sure that commercial fishing in our oceans are working well, then we're going to have a lot more poverty challenges and issues on the coast in the Pacific Northwest than we already do right now. So that's what our brand is trying to address. What about you? What does Organically Grown Company do?
Well, we are 41 years old this year. We started in the fields of Eugene when growers were showing up at the back of store, and they all had their tomatoes and more tomatoes and more tomatoes. And they said, you know what, if we actually coordinated this and you grew eggplant and you grew basil and you grew lettuce, it actually would work a lot better for the retailer and for us, and we'd create a more viable rural community. So that's how it started out. We started as a nonprofit with one Vista volunteer running OGC, eventually got a truck and started saying, you know, hey, if we actually consolidated that in one location, in one cold shed, it'd actually be a lot easier for all of us. Growers want to grow product. They don't necessarily want to drive around in a truck and deliver it. And from there, we grew into, we believe, the largest inventory of organic produce in the United States, serving Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, California, Alaska, and other regions. So.
That's all?
That's all. That's it. Just a little bit. But in that, we actually also consider ourselves a food hub. So we have trucks on the road, and one of our missions is to create sustainability wherever we can. So we do a lot of front haul and back haul. That's where you hear me mention some of the products that we work with in terms of helping makers get access to additional regions, right? So a lot of folks are starting a small business. I worked for New Seasons for 15 years, so a lot of Subarus in the back of the store. You know, it's hard. Distribution logistics is really hard, and that's one of the greatest challenges for the maker community. So we're looking to find solutions for folks in that space as well, and then also get great product to great independent retailers who are also looking to have a good expansion of market in this really competitive environment.
I just love her and what she does, huh? Doesn't that sound great?
It's a lot of fun.
I'm just super curious. What's the personal narrative of you that makes you either a great leader for OGC or why you wanted to work for OGC? Is there a relationship between your personal story and your work, or are they completely separate things?
That's an interesting question. This isn't fully rehearsed, by the way. So, you know, it's interesting. I've always been, my linkage to food starts when I was 4 years old, and I went to Drumlin Farm in Massachusetts. It's an Audubon Society farm outside of Boston. And I came home one day, and my mom put a chicken on the table, and I looked at it, and I said, is that the chicken I was playing with this morning? And so I always felt this great linkage to food. And I still remember the things we made, the butter we churned, the food that we produced. We harvested and we made vegetable soup. I remember it being the best vegetable soup, being very tied to how does food taste and why. And that's been my thread throughout my life. I worked at the Pure Food Campaign, protested bovine growth hormone when it first came out, led a lot of that work, worked for Senator Leahy on Farm Bill, which is really important to try to get more dollars for things other than commodity crops. And my linkage has been food. When I came to Portland, I wanted to get into retail because I think there's nothing more important than providing people choice and good information. That's why I landed at New Seasons. Actually landed at a law firm first for one day, and then I got my dream job working closing shifts at New Seasons. And went over there. And in terms of the transition to OGC, you know, I actually went to New Seasons for the product, and I stayed for the people. I got on the operations track, and I loved giving opportunity and creating space for learning and growth, and seeing what inspires people and how they work best and kind of helping create paths for their careers as best as possible on the operations side. But going to OGC gets me closer to the grower as well, which is creating a sustainable regional food economy really drives me.
That sounds like it started at 4.
I know.
Oh my God, that level of focus blows me away. That's impressive. Like, my story's completely different. I'm just going to assume you're interested because
Tell me
we're up
more.
here.
Tell me more. Let me ask. Tell me more about you, Kipp.
Well, let's see. My personal story involves a lot of childhood trauma. Anybody got time and a psychology couch? Oh, phew. I jest, but actually, really it does. Like, I wasn't into seafood when we started Fishpeople. I didn't eat fish, actually, 8 years ago, because I kind of thought it was gross. Which turns out a lot of consumers in the United States also think fish is gross. For good reason, because the industry hasn't done a good job of providing high-quality fish. But I digress. Back to my personal childhood problems. Right? As we called out some of the black entrepreneurs before, right? There was 4 in the room, and we were excited. You know, unfortunately, I'm a straight white guy, right? I'm a demographic, hopefully in transition, if we're honest, right? You know, straight white guys in positions of power, ideally is a demographic in transition. That was a friend said that to me the other day. And my childhood, though, was probably not so stereotypically straight white guy. Like, I dealt with adversity. Now, I'm not saying I dealt with racism or sexism or any of that stuff, because hard for me to do as a straight white guy, right? But I did have some stuff go down that made me deeply passionate about helping other people and empathizing with other people and their struggles in life. And I think that has driven my entire professional career to try to somehow make a difference and make it better. That's been my North Star. And I've chosen the private sector as a means to do that, largely because when I was in San Francisco during the dot-com boom right outside of college, I couldn't get hired at a tech company, and I didn't know what business development was, and all my friends were getting vice president of business development jobs for $75,000 a year, and I said, what's business development? And all I wanted to do is create mentorship programs for the city's homeless. But that's at the heart of what I brought to Fishpeople and the other 2 companies I founded, is this deep, deep need to help and be of service to the world writ large, be it people or the environment. So I can't say I claimed an interest in food at 4 or seafood even 8 years ago, but I do want to help out, because it just makes me feel good when I go to bed.
But it's kind of the most important part of our businesses, right? Because everything in food is relationship-based. Right, within our cultures, within our communities, within our relationships with our vendors, trust, honesty, transparency. I mean, that's a really common thread, and it's increasingly rare, unfortunately, in this day and age.
I couldn't agree more. In seafood, I would say the currency of the realm is connection. If you can't look someone in the eye and shake your hand and say, I just bought 1 million pounds of fish at $1.25, I'll pay you in 30 days. That's your contract in fish.
Same in produce.
Right? That's there's not a written agreement that I can go. And so, yeah, I would say that connecting it back to my childhood story. See, I just always want to talk about me and my childhood, right? I'm clearly have unresolved issues.
It's actually really important to understand, right?
But I'm driven to build deep relationships personally. And when I got into the supply chain of seafood, it was really hard for me. There's some really aggressive, intense personalities, and it took time to figure out who could you trust, who could you not trust, who was quality producer, who was not. And much like navigating your way as a 5th grader through the playground to figure out who the nice kids are, who the cool kids are, and who the dweebs are, right? And figure out which crowd resonates with your heart. We've had to do that in fish. So you have to do the same thing in produce?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's a very interesting industry, really dynamic industry, changing industry, and I think for us, it's we exist in part to be a supply chain engineer solution provider, right? So the best thing that OGC can do is sell the whole crop for a grower and find markets for them and develop new commodities and new crops, and likewise the consumer and the retailer wins on the other side, right? So yeah, I mean, all of what we do is have a lot of conversations and listen hard. What do they need? Where are their struggles? Where can we provide solutions? And a lot of times it's not just in logistics or distribution or selling product, it's in the labor market, right? There's a tremendous pressure throughout the Pacific Northwest in labor, and I know we're experiencing it in our realm as well. But if you think about being out in the fields, that is increasingly more challenging for folks. So how can we get involved at the state level, the federal level, in terms of creating solutions? And then we also just try to be really creative thinkers, right? We have some resources, we have lots of friends and partners. So one of the things we did a couple years ago was we helped to bring a new product to market called Purple Sprouting Broccoli. It's a really cool product. If you haven't tasted it, I definitely recommend it. Probably really good with fish.
My kids love it.
Your kids love it. Excellent. Yeah, and the cool story about that is it's grown over the winter, and it's one of the first items to be harvested in the spring, and so it brings revenue to growers at a time where they don't have anything else to harvest, and so it gets them some cash flow really early on, and so that's kind of the creative thinking that we seek to bring by building relationships and listening hard and not being afraid of being complex and trying new things and being really creative and your reputation is everything, right? So act with integrity all the time.
If I pick that apart, what I hear is seasonality is important to maintaining year-round labor force. We have a very similar thing in seafood, right? The tuna come hopefully in July. This year they came in August, which was a really big bummer for the P&L, but hey, they still came. And then they stay generally to the end of September, the beginning of October. And then what? And then crab comes, ideally December or January, hangs out till February, March, and then what? So when we think about at least product development or business expansion within our commodities group, right? What we try to think about for managing labor is how do you diversify and scale the business so that you can have more year-round jobs than just seasonal jobs? Because we can do more from a benefits package standpoint for a year-round employee in terms of healthcare, higher wages, bonuses, get them into opportunities for individual development plans, career ladder pathing, and stuff like that, different than you can with a seasonal employee, which is much more commoditized labor. So we, at least within our B2B group, which really runs all the commodities for the company, we try to think about the business model as how do you get year-round labor, which then influences our product decisions. And then in an ideal scenario, because remember we're building a vertically integrated, iconic brand, seafood brand, you ideally would love to see the brand products now start picking off some of that stuff that comes off our landings at the coast, if we could. It'd be great. Yeah. You want to buy some? It'd be really helpful.
We've actually thought about distributing seafood. No. Just kidding. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it is to be a B Corp?
Sure. Does everybody in the room know what a B Corp is? Good. So do we need to talk about it, or you guys all covered? Just got a lot of confidence up in the front row, at least. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, B Lab is a great organization. One of the founders is a good friend of mine, lives in New York, and however long ago when it was started, it was really clear to me that just like the straight white guys, ideally a transitioning demographic, can business also begin to adapt its practices to be more inclusive of a broader set of stakeholders? Ideally, business would transition to that mindset as well. For us, being a B Corp is essential to everything we do because it means purpose matters, right? Purpose matters. It's at the heart of employee recruitment and retention. It's at the heart of how you organize supply chain procurement, planning, and logistics. It's at the heart of product development and design. And without it, you might be wandering through the desert without a compass or a divining rod knowing where the water is. And we find it's really helpful to have a North Star. In addition to that, the auditing process that you go through every now 3 years, used to be 2 years, it's wonderful to have an external accountability partner. How well are you doing on that purpose? You say it matters, but are you, greenwashing everybody with your practices? Because it's really in vogue today to pop up a page on your website and say, we're sustainable and we care about our workforce. So what are you actually doing? That accountability, much like you have in accounting, we get audited in accounting, right? Why not get audited in how well we're living into our purpose? How does it, you're different than a B Corp, and since you're a purpose trust, correct?
We are a purpose trust.
So that's pretty new and avant-garde, pioneering. What other awesome forward-thinking words could I use besides pioneer?
Those are great. I love those words.
Amazing.
Entrepreneurial,
Super.
innovative.
Did I say pioneer already?
You said pioneer.
Okay.
I love that you picked up on pioneer. Yeah, I think we think about ourselves early on, right? So we were organic before organic was a thing, right? Back in the 70s, and so we were some of the original pioneers trying to create. Make the world organic, right? Wouldn't it be cool if there were 100% organic farmland? And so, but in reality, we're actually activists, right? Out there to change the world and change the supply chain, change communities. We should talk a little bit about the rural-urban divide in a second too. But that's kind of our real roots. And so we started, as I said, as a nonprofit, and then we turned into a co-op, right? Which made a lot of sense. Grower-owned co-op. For our first 20 years, our growers really led the business in many ways. And then from there, we converted into an S Corp. We had some growers who were wanting to transition out, and we needed some solutions there, S Corp, ESOP. And then for the next 20 years, the staff really drove the business. And what we recognized a few years back was that we were starting to see some challenges with our ownership model and our governance model. And we really wanted to understand what would help us be independent and mission-driven for the next 40 years, right? We wanted to have another good 40 years of being true to purpose and staying independent, making our own decisions. And we started looking around, what could we do, what was out there, what existed, and we actually didn't find an ownership model that really made a lot of sense. So we invented one. And we looked to our friends in Europe, right? They do have some perpetual purpose trusts that exist. A couple really cool companies, Bosch Tools, which you may have heard of, and Dr. Hauschka and others have really innovative ownership models. And so we worked with great attorney, worked with Organic Valley for a long time in developing a whole new governance structure. And so yes, OGC sold all of its shares over the past year to the Sustainable Food and Ag Perpetual Purpose Trust. Exists into perpetuity to support mission. We're developing our own criteria, modeled very much after the B Corp, to measure ourselves against mission. And never can be sold again, right? So that's kind of the goal, is the shares are held into perpetuity, much like an art collection or other items that are typically held in trust. And the cool thing is, we think, one, other companies could come under the trust, and so it actually could become a consortium of regional or national companies. But also it's a model for other industries. Other industries also need solutions to financing and ownership and mission and purpose, right? And need to create a better and stronger linkage between what they do and how they do it through the financing structure. Think about healthcare, for example, right? What would happen if it wasn't as motivated by the financial bottom dollar? So.
You think it's a viable exit pathway for my venture investors at Fishpeople?
I do, and I'd love to talk to you more about that.
She's going to come and speak at the next board meeting at Fishpeople. You just signed up.
Yeah, I mean, we've had dozens and dozens of companies honestly come to us and say, hey, what are you doing? I mean, there's a lot of folks out there with access to capital who are very interested in creating a very strong regional food economy that, again, stays independent and true to mission and is able to put mission first.
And just, I guess, I should say, just in case any of the board members are in the room and upset with me right now, yes, we have venture capital investors. Yes, to some, that's a Faustian bargain because all of a sudden you have pressure to deliver results that might make you make decisions that are contrary to your purpose matters B Corp exaltation I made earlier. What I would say is we're super lucky in that our investor base are folks that care about the same purpose that we care about, right? And I think that's unique in the venture space. There are more of them. This is an industry that I came out of. And I would say 20 years ago, it wasn't quite the same as it is now. So we're lucky to have, I don't know if they would go for a purpose trust, but they're open to exploring alternative paths for liquidity. And quite honestly, that's good enough for me because building a brand is extremely expensive. So we're thankful for their money. So if any of you are in the room, that's my nod to you.
And you do still have to run a viable business model, even if you're owned by a perpetual purpose trust. No margin, no mission, right?
No margin, no mission, yes. I almost want to take a left turn briefly.
Please.
I'm thinking about OGC and I'm thinking about the word organic. And my brain, and I don't know about yours or the rest of the people that are part of our fireside chat, goes to the land, right? I hear organic and I think about soil is what I think about. And then I think about fish and I say, what's the equivalent in fish? Is there, God, I get stuck. Then I think of all these brands. in the grocery store today and I say, well, Dannon and Yoplait went to Chobani, Stony Hill, gosh, all the yogurt companies. And Oscar Mayer went to Applegate, nitrate free. And you go down this list, you say, wow, every category in the grocery store pretty much has had this revolution of there was this mainstream conventional thing that was bad for the planet or bad for you, and now you have an alternative that you could go for. But in fish, we don't really have that. You got Starkist, you got bumblebee tuna, chicken of the sea, etc. Gorton's, don't forget Gorton's, and the awesome fish stick. We've innovated a lot in seafood since 1950. Way to go, team. But I'm struck by most of the food conversation being about the land. And sometimes, if I'm honest, at Fishpeople, we feel a little left out. Like the sea is important. And it's actually bigger than the land. Just want to be clear, and it feeds more people globally. And there's a giant garbage-sized patch of ocean that's 4 times the size of France. Maybe we should do something about it. So how in this, how does the sea become just as important as the land to people? Do you have any ideas on how can you help me build our brand? Like, why is the sea important?
I think we might want to go for audience participation here. Why is the sea important? I think out of sight, out of mind to some degree, right? The land, we drive through our fields. We see when our fields are taken over by new high-rises and condos and developments, right? And when farms go out of business, it's much more visible. I don't know if many of you go to the Portland Farmers Market, but for me, it's like really sad to see when growers are no longer there, right? They actually didn't have a succession strategy for their farm, or they had to scale back, or they didn't have the labor to drive up, and right, so it's very visible, very in your face. So I don't know.
Harder to suffer the tragedy of the commons in the land than it is the sea, right?
Yeah.
And you asked earlier about the urban-rural divide. One of the things that drives our company is this concept that urban and rural need each other at the end of the day, right? All of us that live in a city benefit from food, water, shelter, and energy. In fact, it doesn't really matter where you live, you need food, water, shelter, and energy, right? They're the basic sustenance blocks of life. And one of the things that is often easy to forget in our urban environment, where we can go to the grocery store and plug in wherever we want to our electric sockets and buy wood as if it just popped out of a Home Depot shelf, no problem. And you say to yourself, wow, actually, you know what? Portland has 2 days worth of food security. What happened if all those rural communities just started to boycott urban environments and said, we're not sending you food? Right? Or when the transportation system went down and distribution of the food network in the United States stopped, urban environments wouldn't be as attractive anymore, right? And yet in urban environments, we often forget about rural environments, and that food, water, shelter, and energy comes from rural landscapes. And for me, healing that divide personally is, it's kind of one of the major things going on in our country right now, if we really think about it. The difference between urban and rural, right, is the very thinly veiled class war in the United States. And if we're not thoughtful about it, the things that you care about in food that I and our company care about in the sea, and then the other major natural resource extractive industries that support our entire livelihoods as people, as humans, are threatened. And so it's something we think about at Fishpeople every day when we think about our B Corp status. How are we trying to heal that divide and integrate that divide? How do our products do it? How do our labor or employment practices do it? Do you have
an example? I was going to ask you do you have an example of how you've tackled that?
How we've tackled it?
Yeah.
Quite honestly, like yesterday, we had an all-day strategy retreat at the office. And it's really awesome to bring people from different cultures together. So a lot of it right now is just an example is you're asking people to do work together that don't normally do work together. You think, what happens in an urban environment? A lot of folks at work, right, at least in our office, I'm at my desk, I'm at a computer, and I'm doing this all day. Like your job is 8 hours of that. And then maybe you go into a meeting and then you go back to. Whereas you go to the coast and you're operating on one of our landings, you're never doing that. You're actually driving a forklift, operating a hoist, right? Making sure the ice machine's working and you're not cutting your foot off when you're next to the auger. So building cultural bridges inside the company is where it starts for us.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we think about our population too. Over half of our staff operations, maybe working overnight, not necessarily having access to the farms, the growers. So drivers, right? We have a huge workforce of drivers across the Pacific Northwest. How do we get those folks the same level of experience? Bring them on customer tours, bring them to conferences, bring them out in the fields. We do try to do a lot of constant education and talking and bringing back information. Not the full solution, right? But a step. I mean, understanding the why of why we're in business and what we do, and having everybody understand their role in that and the importance of that role and the criticality of all of those pieces fitting together to serve the grower and serve the customer is absolutely imperative.
So as CEO, when you're in charge theoretically of leading people and culture, among other things, right? How do you? I'm hearing that there's cross-training is a very important component of your people and culture strategy. Are there other hallmarks to it that are really essential for long-term success? Because if we don't have happy people, right, you can't ultimately build a company. You're never gonna innovate or pioneer very much if you got a crew of people that aren't stoked to work, right? So what else do you guys do?
And it's one of the hardest things, right? So a lot of our folks are there. Organic agriculture is their mission and purpose in life, right? But we also have a lot of folks there because they want to work in an environment where they're treated like human beings, and their voice matters, and their concerns matter, and they're a part of creating solutions. And so we're certainly not perfect and always on a continuum, but to me, the best information, we all say this all the time, comes from people on the front lines. And so how do you create structures and opportunity for them to drive change and drive improvements and drive the focus of what the issues are that we need to be resolving? It's a continuum, right? It's always a continuum. And how do you balance, too, growing people who have been dedicated to the business, right? The business builders, we're 40 years old. We have people that have been in their role for 30 years. And, you need to balance that growth with also bringing in new energy, new ideas, but making sure people who were part of the original business grow it and are part of that for the long term.
That sounds great. You can come over and address our staff at some point, too. It'd be awesome.
You should come to ours, too.
It's really fun to talk to someone I love learning. So anytime I learn from everybody that I talk to.
Have you done Strength Finders? I recommend everyone do
Strength Finders. It's funny. We're doing a Strength
fun.
Finder training on November 7th.
Perfect. I bet your learner will be your number one.
Learner is, I've been told by our coach that I like to learn. Yes, I've been told by many, it's a problem at the end of the day. Oh, look, we have 33 seconds left for our fireside chat. Closing thoughts?
I'll let you go first. Go out there and change the world, right? Y'all are doing amazing things. This is the community. Rely on it. Ask for help. I mean, we had such a great conversation the other night. We were like, do you think we'll have anything to talk about? And an hour and a half later, we're like, I think we'll be okay. But rely on people. Reach out, right? I mean, I think that's one of the biggest pieces that I was told early on is it gets lonely sometimes in these businesses, but everybody has exciting solutions and creative opportunities. And thanks for putting, these conferences, these opportunities are incredible places to connect.
Have a North Star. If you don't have a North Star, you can't accomplish anything.
Know your why, absolutely, why you exist.